Can you imagine that the car that Ferrari built so that Lewis Hamilton fights for his 8th title is sabotaged from within? What if I tell you that in a seemingly harmless test, Hamilton discovered something so serious that forced Vasseur to open an urgent internal investigation? Prepare, because what hit the SF-25 goes far beyond a simple engineering failure. On July 17, 2025, Ferrari summoned his pilots to a test in Mugello that apparently was no more important than a simple filming day. Officially, the activity was limited to a promotional filming of 200 kilometers, a more planned event for sponsors and press material than for technical development. However, in practice it was anything but harmless. On that day marked in the calendar as trivial, Ferrari activated a covert test to evaluate a series of sensitive updates in the SF-25. Among them, a new rear suspension configuration designed by the recently incorporated technical director, Loic Serra. And that was the trigger for the scandal. Lewis Hamilton, a newcomer from Mercedes, piloted under these conditions with the clear intention of better understanding a car that, until that moment, had generated more questions than answers. During his batches, something caught his attention. The car felt different. Not in the positive sense of technical progress, but in the visceral sensation, almost intuitive, that something did not square. His experience, forged after decades of successes in champions cars, told him that this car did not respond as he should. To each curve, to each weight transition, the SF-25 revealed an erratic pattern in its dynamic behavior. When he returned to boxes, Hamilton did not just give standard feedback. He requested to review specific data from the longitudinal balance, the rear suspension reaction angle, and the behavior of the medium traction differential. It was there that the tension began to climb. According to internal sources, Hamilton detected what he described as a fundamental inconsistency in the way the car transferred the weight between axes. This was not a simple deviation from setup. It was a structural anomaly that should not exist in a first-level Formula One car. The surprise of the engineers was capital. No previous analysis, neither in simulation nor in the wind tunnels, had revealed that failure. Worse, that kind of inconsistency cannot arise spontaneously. I had to be there from the initial design. The fact that it was only revealed after several races and 2 months of the season raised alarms that went beyond the technical. How could something like this go unnoticed? Who signed the reports that assured that this car was validated? Loic Serra, who had assumed the position after the departure of Enrico Cardile, was put under immediate pressure. His update in the rear suspension had been one of his first interventions in the car, seeking to correct the lack of traction that had been affecting Ferrari since 2024. But when implementing his proposal, what Hamilton found was that the variables that determine the behavior of the suspension, the angle of incidence, the hardness of the tilting dynamic overcompensation in medium-speed curves. From a technical point of view, that implies that the car is reacting contradictory, hardening in phases where it should be compressed and floating in areas where support is expected. The result is a feeling of unpredictability that prevents the pilot from having full confidence at the entrance of the curve. And in a championship as adjusted as that of 2025, that lack of trust is the difference between fighting for pole or being out of Q3. What aggravates the issue is that this bomb does not explode in pre-season, but in full season, with Ferrari under scrutiny and Hamilton needing urgent results. Revelation shakes the team, not only because it compromises the competitiveness of the SF-25, but because it implies that the entire development model since 2024 could be based on a defective base. We are not talking about a poorly adjusted component, but of a poorly designed concept. And that means that fast solutions do not exist. This test in Mugello not only altered the course of the season, but lit a cold war inside Ferrari. The directive requires answers. Engineering is divided between old and new loyalties. And in the meantime, Hamilton has gone from being the newly arrived star pilot, becoming the catalyst of an internal crisis that nobody expected, but that everyone must now face. Because what was found in that car could define Ferrari's fate in 2025, and Lewis Hamilton's final legacy in Formula One. The test in Mugello not only exposed the structural inconsistency of the SF-25, it also allowed for the first time in months to observe the car under isolated conditions of competitive pressure, without the need to adjust real-time race parameters, and with the luxury of analyzing data in a meticulous way. It was there that it emerged, without a doubt, a devastating technical diagnosis. What Hamilton and Leclerc were driving was not simply a complex tacky car. It was a platform full of hidden limitations that, together, explain Ferrari's competitive stagnation in 2025. In simple terms, Ferrari built a car whose aerodynamic efficiency depends on such a sensitive balance that, if it does not succeed exactly with that sweet point, the performance falls into minced. And that is a death sentence in Formula One modern. Because in a championship of more than 20 races, in climatic and asphalt conditions, a car must have flexibility to adapt, not fragility to collapse. But if that was not enough, another blow came. The assisted steering system of the SF-25 is defectively calibrated. Both Hamilton and Leclerc reported from the first races of the season an unusual phenomenon, a loss of sensitivity in high-speed curves. It was not a vibration problem or feedback, but of progressivity. In technical words, the system seemed not to deliver a linear gradient of assistance when it passed a certain side speed threshold. In other words, the steering wheel became imprecisely just when more stability and control is needed. In Mugello, having more repeated turns in the same section of track, engineers were able to compare the behavior of the curved direction to curved back after return. And they found a pattern. Between 180 and 220 kilometers per hour, the assistance behaved erratically. Sometimes he hardened without apparent reason. Other times it became so soft that the pilot lost the real perception of the grip. This type of inconsistencies not only affect performance, but they break the pilot's confidence with his car, and in Formula One, that confidence is everything. In addition, this fault in the direction had an indirect consequence. It forced the pilots to take extra precautions in high-speed curves, wasting time in classification where every thousandth. And in the race, in duels rueda by wheel, it prevented aggressive decisions with the certainty that the car would respond as it should. In addition to this, another aspect that was discussed in depth after the test was the way in which the flat background of the car responds to contact with the ground. Ferrari had tried to harden the suspension to prevent the car bottomira, that is, to touch the ground with the flat background, but in doing so, mechanical grip was committed to slow curves. If they softened it, the car brushed too much in line and lost speed of friction. A dead end. All this combined draws a bleak panorama. Ferrari not only has a demanding car, it has a schizophrenic car which responds in different ways to minimal changes. And that lack of predictability is the greatest enemy of stable performance. Mugello, then, was not a simple day of filming. It was the day that Ferrari had to look in the mirror and accept that the car that promised to return them to the title is not only far from that, but could be fundamentally broken since their conception. The most worrying, many of these failures are not solved with an update of pieces. They require structural redesign. Something that, in the middle of the season, is practically unfeasible. One of the voltage spotlights was the legacy of the previous technical director Enrico Cardile. Although he was no longer in his position, his structural influence on SF-25 is absolute. The car that piloted Hamilton today was, in essence, conceived under his vision. Loic Serra, his successor, inherited not only limitations but also errors. What should be an evolution became a desperate reformulation of poorly founded concepts. Vasseur suspects that the transition between Cardile and Serra was not transparent. Internally there is talk of makeup reports, wind tunnel sessions omitted in the final reports, and stress tests that were minimized so as not to delay the construction schedule. If it is confirmed that there was data manipulation, we would be faced with an unprecedented scandal that could end with mass dismissals in the technical department. But beyond the fury contained, the director of Ferrari faced a strategic decision: how to contain the crisis without collapsing the complete project of 2025. You cannot redesign a car from scratch to the middle of the season. Nor can you say goodbye to half-technical team without compromising development. Vasseur is caught between two fronts, maintaining institutional calm outwards and unleashing a controlled purge inward. The final blow to the team's morale came when Vasseur decided to climb the review at the external audit level. A drastic movement that suggests the depth of the problem. In Maranello, independent consultants have been summoned to audit the design and production decisions of the SF-25. What is sought is not only to correct the current failure, but to understand which organizational culture allowed this to happen. And what was found was not a minor error. It was a fault that calls into question the entire system of quality control, design and development of one of the most emblematic teams in history. For Lewis Hamilton, this discovery has been a double-edged sword. On the one hand, he positions it as an unquestionable technical leader within the team, someone capable of diagnosing problems that not even the engineers detected. But on the other hand, it forces him to carry an immense responsibility, to be the pilot who must not compete, but to restructure a team from the cockpit. His signing by Ferrari, far from being a simple sports transition, is becoming a rescue mission. And for Ferrari, the big question is whether they are still in time to reverse the situation. Can these structural errors correct during the season? Is it necessary to sacrifice this championship to redesign the route project? Or are we facing another chapter of a long list of wasted opportunities that have defined Ferrari from the Schumacher era? Now I want to know your opinion. Do you think Ferrari will save this season with emergency settings? Can Hamilton transform this crisis into a redemption story, or will it end up sinking with a car that was never up to it? Leave it in the comments.